And the dentist office was in more of an industrial environment as opposed to a downtown place that looks like a doctor's office. I thought it was just creative thinking on his part. And frankly, as I was paying out, the natural thought of mine was, well, maybe this guy's less expensive because he's spending less money on his location, on his real estate.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 260. Many businesses are struggling to stay afloat during this COVID-19 pandemic, and commercial real estate is no exception. So how can real estate investors and professionals stay ahead of the curve? And what type of calculated risk could actually be beneficial for commercial real estate? Today, we're going to talk with an attorney whose 30 years of experience has given him insight into how to navigate this crisis in order to survive the rapidly changing commercial office and retail real estate market. Johnny Merritt is a Texas-based attorney experienced in complex corporate and real estate matters. He represents billion-dollar corporations and multi-million-dollar real estate developers. And today, he's going to help us understand the extent of the damage to commercial real estate as well as the opportunities in this area. Johnny, welcome to the show.
Brian, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. I'm honored to be on your program. And as I said when I first talked to you, congratulations on 5 years. Congratulations on over 250,000 episodes. Congratulations on reaching over 1 million listeners all over the world. It's what you have done. You're a pioneer, I suppose, in the podcast business. But thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Well, thank you, Johnny. It's great to hear that. We're very proud of the show and just our listenership and how we've actually been able to survive for almost 5 years now. So, and it's because of guests like yourself. And why don't we start with you just telling us a little bit about yourself?
I graduated from law school in the late 80s with a full intention of being a transactional lawyer, real estate lawyer. And I spoke to a Baylor Law School class recently and told them, frankly, what you end up doing as an attorney is what comes in the door, because what came in the door was back then was a Federal Savings Loan Insurance Corporation, which turned into Resolution Trust Corporation, which was eventually the FDIC. And for 10 years, I did litigation all over the nation, suing officers and directors of Federal Savings and Loan institutions. And so in spite of best laid plans of wanting to be a transactional lawyer for 10 years, I didn't do it. But after 10 years, I had my fill of litigation. And so for the last 25 years, I've focused on doing commercial real estate, do a little bit of residential real estate, mostly as a personal investment, and do a lot of based on my representation of the federal government for 10 years, know a lot about fiduciary duties of officers and directors, so do a lot of corporate law. But my love is real estate, and it's been a great career for me.
Johnny, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing out there with your clients. I know you represent billion-dollar corporations, multi-million-dollar developers. What is the extent of this crisis that we're in with COVID-19? What are you seeing on your side of the fence there?
To answer that, I have to tell you to keep in mind that I'm in Austin, Texas. And so I had lunch with my client who's a real estate developer who relocated from San Diego, and he does residential development. And the Austin residential market is exploding. It's up 20%. Article in the Austin American Statesman yesterday was talking about how much stronger even now compared to last year real estate is in Austin. Nevertheless, and talked about this somewhat in your 250th episode, which I listened to, there clearly is some impact. We've kind of, let me finish on the residential market. I had an appraiser who told me for the first time we have both a buyer's and a seller's market. And I asked him to explain that, and he said, well, from a seller's market, prices are up. in real estate, in residential real estate, but interest rates are so low that the buyers are willing to pay a little bit more. And I thought that was right. On a commercial standpoint, we've seen things turn on their head. You correctly identified in your episode that things are very difficult for retail, which used to carry strip shopping centers. It's the service businesses now that are carrying strip shopping centers. The office market in Austin, it's going to be hit. It's going to be hit hard, but different. It's a little different from retail shopping because the leases can be longer, and so we've had a delayed effect. We don't really know. Clearly, with COVID and the working from home and the exodus, frankly, from the urban areas to the more suburban areas, there is going to be a lessening demand for office property. And then some of the what we used to refer to as a less sexy property, industrial building, I think, and I would include self-storage in that. Those are things that are just exploding. Things are a lot better, frankly, Brian, than I thought they would be. But the question is what's going to happen as we move into 2021? What's going to happen to the extent perhaps 1031 will be questioned? Section 1031, and so there's lots of issues that I think it's very difficult to know.
Given your 30 plus years of experience, as you look out and see what's happening now and the uncertainty, can you go back over that past 30 years and point to a time and place where things felt the same, or is this entirely a new dilemma that we're facing right now?
The only way that I can answer that is I wish I was smart enough to tell you what I knew myself. Because I can think back on 2008, and frankly, as a new attorney, I even think back in the late 1980s in the crisis we went through with the savings and loans. But this feels different. I mean, things have moved so rapidly in both directions. Frankly, once COVID hit, things, as we know, came to a standstill. And unemployment skyrocketed. And everything just came to a stop, and we really worried about the impact that would have. But the stock market has come back strong. Real estate in Austin, particularly, has been extremely strong, so it's swung back to the strength. But there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty because, again, the real estate market has kind of flipped on its head. We used to want to be downtown. Now and we've got to add to that, we have the millennials that are now getting to the age where they want more space and they want to live in different areas. So there's a lot of moving factors that I'm not sure we've ever had before. But I'm encouraged. I'm not worried for my clients. I'm encouraged, and my clients are very encouraged about what the real estate market is doing.
I should point out that we are speaking October 19th, so it's pre-election. By the time this comes out, everything you just said could be flipped upside down.
And it probably will be.
So before we get to the opportunities, can you dig into retail and office specifically, and just tell us about some of the pain that you're seeing out there, with whether it be with your clients or other people's clients, and the kind of advice that you as an attorney are giving them?
On retail specifically, and I will include within that restaurants, because that's a heavy business that we're involved in, and we do a lot of work in Austin, and it's tough. It is tough. So what I'd say, but that's true in clothing stores and most all retail stores. What we're telling our clients is, let us look at the leases. Let us look carefully at what your opportunities are under the lease, so we can advise you what opportunities you have. We also need to think about if a landlord is willing to give some deferment. When does that deferment have to be addressed? Is it have to be addressed as a lump sum after a short period of time, or can that be at the end of the lease? And so we can help negotiate some of those things. From an office lease standpoint, I will tell you specifically in Austin, as of October 19th, the landlords still are taking pretty strong positions on lease rates, but I think there's little question that those probably will come down. People that are thinking about office space need to think carefully about how much that they need and for what period of time. And then we're also looking at sublease issues. There are lessees who have too much space, and there are opportunities for smaller organizations to sublease, sometimes at very good rates.
Looking at both sides of the equation there, the landlord side and then the tenant side, is there a best case type scenario that you typically try to get to with both? Like, how would you advise any landlords out there listening right now who own retail like that in order to come to the best possible solution with their tenant? It's
a very case specific, Brian, on knowing what to do. If the landlords have the ability, because with cash flow, if their mortgage requirements are such that they can, many of my clients, I have one client who simply forgave some rent months of rent. That's very unique, and it was very kind for them to do that. But I think that those who can give some deferment and then allow a period of time after that deferment for the tenants to be able to pay, because some of these service businesses, some of the retail businesses, not less so the service business, but the retail businesses are struggling. I read the article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about how credit scores are artificially inflated, and because credit cards have been paid off. Well, that's consistent with people are not going to buy clothing, people are not going to buy records, people are not going to the movie, people are not spending less money, which causes the businesses that are in these retail shopping centers to have cash flow problems. And so, to the extent a landlord can defer and then can defer longer, that's helpful. But there are landlords that can't do that, and I'm worried about them. And that's true of the residential market as well, where you've had the federal government who has said you can't kick somebody out for not paying rent, but there's no remedy for the landlord whose payments for mortgage have to continue.
Staying on that topic, you've got option A is, you mentioned one of your clients just forgave the rent. They said, well, you don't have to pay the rent for a period of time. Option B is defer the rent. So, okay, don't pay it now or pay a portion of it now. You still owe it, but we'll spread that payment out over a period of time. And it sounds like more of your clients and maybe more of your advice falls into option B category, which is defer.
It would be, and so to the on that big option, you can either say we're going to defer it, for instance, for 3 months. That's kind of what we saw at the beginning, and there's so those are coming due, and so do they have to pay the lump sum and then continue to pay monthly, or can we what I've really, the second best choice has been putting those deferred lease payments on the end of the lease, so that their cash flow requirements for paying rent will come back, but they won't be penalized because that period of time when they were having such cash flow problems.
I didn't catch what you just said about if you defer those payments. Did you say they're being moved to the end of the lease term?
Correct. If there could actually be a deferment and then move those payments to the end of the lease term, so that when they resume paying lease, they won't have they won't even have an increased amount. They'll just have the same amount, so it can help them try to ease their burden as they're building back their business.
So if you have a retail tenant and you strike that sort of agreement, that sort of is a forgiveness. Let's say it's a 3-month deferment 3 months you don't have to pay, but we'll tack that on to the end. You'll pay for three additional months. That is sort of a freebie for them. They just have to stay in that lease longer.
Right. That's correct. That you have said it correctly. Let me say this, and forgive me for interrupting you, Brian, but let me say this. Some landlords don't have the ability to do that, or their business plan doesn't permit them to do that. The lease contract clearly requires payment. So I don't want any of your listeners to think that I'm criticizing or in any way offended by landlords who need to require that their tenants comply with the lease agreements.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because landlords, they have lenders who they have agreements with as well, and they have to pay their monthly mortgage, and they may not have the freedom to defer or forgive rents.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Is there a third option other than just eviction or foreclosure?
It's difficult. If a landlord cannot afford for a tenant not to pay, it's difficult because who are they going to get as a replacement tenant? And so right now it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma that we're dealing with, and I don't know. We haven't found a creative way to address that issue other than trying to negotiate between the existing landlord and existing tenant. And particularly for retail shopping centers where we don't have an existing service type business or grocery store or it's one of the types of businesses that are booming in this different environment, it's difficult to find replacement tenants.
And even with deferment, you could defer for 3 months, but we're still in the middle of a pandemic. 3 months from now, it could be worse.
It could be. And yet, with some of my clients, we're seeing some amazing creativity. For instance, I represent a clothing store, and they're competing with Amazon. And they have just become very creative in how they're advertising on social media, how they deliver things. And so for creative minds, and this is typically true in economic downturns, there are real opportunities as well, Brian. So I wrote an article to real estate brokers last week, and what I said in that, and I think it's true for your listeners, experience, nothing really replaces experience except perhaps creativity. And this may give some of the less experienced who have a little more creative mind and who can use electronics and media more than somebody my age. It really gives them an opportunity to be creative and find ways to fill the gap, if you will, between the Amazons and the traditional retail stores.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of my previous guests mentioned the book, Who Moved My Cheese? And right now, everyone's cheese has been moved and they just have to figure out how to find it. And I think that's where the creativity comes in. Right.
I agree with that. That's a great statement. Brian, one of my favorite letters that I've written, and it's a fractional general client. That client buys grocery stores. But one of my favorite letters I've ever written, we simply said, we want to give you help. This is our effort to provide some assistance to you during COVID. The only thing that we ask in return is you find some way to pass on the help to somebody else that you can help. And I wrote that because that's the heart of that client. But let me tell you, on my rental houses, I haven't been asked to do that, and I've got mortgage payments on the other side of that.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. So what are some of the opportunities you see out there, and how do you see some of your clients taking advantage of those opportunities?
The residential arena, and because I represent residential developers, that business is just exploding. I do think that there are long-term opportunities for real estate investors who have cash availability to invest in areas where there will be a need, even if there's a short-term lull in that need. In real estate, I remember as a young attorney, I was told that the greatest rule for real estate is location, location, location. Nothing changes that, Brian. I think that remains true. So for real estate investors who have the financial means to make an investment in a great location, they should do that. And we're seeing that. I'm a director of a bank, and as a director, we're seeing lots of real estate investors getting in cash positions to make opportunistic investments. Also, investments in places like grocery stores that house food products like grocery stores. You can find triple net leases in those, and that business is doing extremely well. I think there's some healthcare service businesses that are beginning to do better because of the need for people putting off some of the healthcare needs. So those are the things that immediately come to mind, Brian.
You mentioned residential. Are you seeing a huge boom in both single family and multifamily apartment residential?
Mostly it's in single family. I will tell you that I do think that there will be some slight lessening of demand for multifamily on prices, and because of the huge amount of construction and development of apartments in the Austin area. But I think that's going to be very short-lived. I think that market is going to remain extremely strong. And I think that there may be a real need for more apartment, not only because of just the growth of Austin, but there is going to be some problems with ownership next year as people are unable to find employment, perhaps. And so if you find yourself, and that's something we're dealing with a little bit, is how do we advise, particularly, well, let me say this, it really answers a prior question. One opportunity I think that may exist is there may be some need for some residential owners who don't have the ability to refinance to perhaps do sell and leasebacks. And so that may be an opportunity for people to buy residential real estate in a market like Austin, where things are hot and will probably continue to be hot. And while at the same time helping people who may have short-term pains from the pandemic.
What about calculated risk? Let's talk about taking calculated risks. And I know over your 30 plus years of experience, you've seen many people take calculated risks. What do you see happening right now, and how do you think it's going to play out?
If you're talking about in the real estate market, I guess I have some fear that the development is so strong. I mean, we have builders that are going so strong, and you've got to think that there may be a correction at some point. I think there's a calculated risk right now in some of the downtown development areas, making investments in the urban areas. But I think that's, again, I go back to my rule of location, location, location. And so I think it's a calculated risk because I think there's some risk in the short term, but I think that risk in the long term is very, very good. I also think that we see a lot of movement in investments going to more industrial type buildings, that those historically have not been real sexy investments. But I think that those will continue because Amazon's here to stay, and those that service Amazon are here to stay. And also, there's a real effort to save money, to adjust the bottom line. And so, if we can do things from a less expensive location, from a square feet standpoint, then I think that there will be an effort to do that. And frankly, even this morning, I was in a professional's office that was in a much less sexy location, and frankly, a much less sexy build out. But I thought it was really smart, because I think it's a new way of thinking that what we've been through in 2020 may have altered a lot of thoughts.
Can you be more specific about the interesting build out and why?
Sure. I was in a dentist office, and the dentist office was in a more of an industrial environment, and had more of an industrial look on the inside, as opposed to a downtown place that looks like a doctor's office. I thought it was just creative thinking on his part, and frankly, as I was paying out, just the natural thought of mine was, well, maybe this guy's less expensive because he's spending less money on his location, on his real estate. It was just and I'm sure he would be thrilled. When this podcast comes out, I have to tell him about this podcast so he can hear the impact that he had on my thinking this morning. And that's got to be something that he thought about.
If you look at, say, for example, the hotel world, where we're seeing a lot of distress, do you have any clients who are looking to get into that arena, maybe do some conversion projects?
I don't. The creative thing I have seen is, and this has not been my clients, but I've seen it more in the banking field, is some of the hotels in the downtown Austin metroplex have leased their rooms for civic use, for the COVID issues, and also even for homelessness. And I think that those hotels that have been willing to do that have weathered the storm much better than some who have not. But I personally don't have, but that one, and they're financially strong enough, they'll do fine. But that is a very difficult market right now.
Johnny, I'd like to shift gears slightly here. It's not often I have a high-priced attorney on my show. I know you charge thousands of dollars an hour, so I thought maybe we could take advantage of your time here and just give our listeners some advice on how they should work with their attorneys, when they should work with their attorneys, and how not to spend their entire profit on working with attorneys.
Well, I think that last statement should be corrected. I think they should pay their entire profit to attorneys. No, I'm kidding.
I know. In some cases, I have.
Well, right, and that's a problem. Thank you for getting the chance to talk about that. I've been at this about 35 years, and through that time, what I have seen is there's a natural conflict between attorneys and their clients often. And I'm a real estate investor, and so I need to pull out. I noticed that you have a podcast I think you talked about where you have this a certain method you use to determine how to make investments in real estate. I have a spreadsheet, and where I'm trying to figure out what the what type of cap return I can get, and attorney's fees are one of those. It's just a drain. It's not a sexy thing like my real estate developers have, where they get from architects or they get from developing plans. It's just a cost, and clients get tired of calling they get a contract. They think, I could call my attorney, but for what I think is a 2-minute call, I'm going to get a bill for $150. And do I really need to spend that? And so for the last 10 years or so, that's really got to me as I've matured in my practice. And so what I have done with a lot of my clients, in fact, most of my clients, is we developed a fractional general counsel relationship where they pay me a monthly fee. And for that, they essentially have me as their general counsel. We have a specific engagement letter that sets out what that is. I've been a general counsel for a $2 billion warehouse for about 20, 25 years. So I know what general counsel do. And so they can plan on what their budget's going to be. And then they don't need to worry about that call. That call is they need to make the call, because otherwise they're not going to be able to take advantage of their free minutes, if you think back on the cell phone days. And so what I want to do is develop more of a partnership with my clients, where I'm helping them to promote their bottom line. Their ability to keep more in their back pocket, and them not think of me as just a drain, but as the general counsel, three or four doors down, where they can call me and get whatever advice they may need. And then to your question, when do they need to call? Often. There are a lot of contract issues that we could solve with a simple call. And so what I want to do is figure out how to encourage those calls as opposed to discouraging those calls.
Give us some examples of times you've seen your clients not call you because of what you just said. They don't want to spend the $150 to just have you look at something, or that's what they're thinking in their mind. But then they've created an even bigger, more expensive problem because they didn't see what you would have seen right away.
Well, the greatest example is and this doesn't have to do with real estate, but it's kind of a funny story. Is I had a surgeon that walked into my office, and he dropped down an employment contract that was 70 pages long, and he said, I want you to get me out of this contract. And I said, Dr. Bryan, I'll just use Bryan. So Dr. Bryan, did you sign it? And he said, well, look at page 68 or 70, whatever it was. And so I looked at it, and sure enough, there was his signature. And I said, well, I see you signed it. And he said, well, do you see the squiggly line beside my signature? And I said, yes, I see that. And he said, well, it means I didn't read it. And so if I had the opportunity to tell the doctor there is no squiggly line, I didn't read it, defense to a signed contract, that would have been very helpful. In the real estate market, a great example are rights of first refusal. Rights of first refusal are extremely dangerous. We've seen rights of first refusals in simple leases. We've seen rights of first refusal in cell tower agreements, and rights of first refusal in Texas are enforceable. And so they may seem to be a throwaway provision that if you decide to sell, we want you to sell to us. Well, that's great, right until you have a really expensive piece of property that you want to sell for development, you can't. And so those are two kind of extreme examples. But explain right of first refusal.
So I always thought right of first refusal was you have to, if you have an offer on your property, you have to say, hey, can you match this offer or do better?
Correct.
What's the downfall of that? How could that derail a deal?
Well, number one, it greatly discourages bidding on property, because if there's a certain winner at the end of the day, there's a person who just doesn't want to bid against them. At some point, there'll be deal fatigue, and so I advise all of my. If you're a tenant, get a right of first refusal. If you're a landlord or own land, never give a right of first refusal. Recently, we saw it in a very substantial transaction here in Austin, where there was a right of first refusal, as I told you, in a cell tower lease. The landowners wanted to sell this land for development. And the cell, it was time to renegotiate the cell tower lease. The cell tower lease was in a terrible location, and the cell tower company, frankly, had the power to hold that transaction up for months and months and months. while we dealt with that right of first refusal. The landowners had no idea that that provision was even in that little cell tower lease. And so in Texas, the right of first refusals are very important for landowners to look for and be careful not to give.
Good to know. I want to go back to the fractional arrangement that you talked about. How do you come to a price of value to have that fractional arrangement where someone like myself as a real estate investor could have you as my general counsel, where I could just call you up and say, hey, take a look at this, without worrying about you charging me, $150, $200 just to take a look at a contract?
Well, that's a great question, Brian. Here's what we do: is we try to estimate the amount of time we think you may need, and we kind of do the original estimate based on what we think the hourly fee would be. But we want to give you a good deal. And then the client also has the right to terminate the relationship at any time. But what we do is we keep our hours just as we normally do. We send a monthly bill that shows what the fee would have been had there been we charge by the hour, and then we have our flat fee. And every 6 months we audit those two numbers. What would it have been if we had to charge you an hourly rate? What did we charge you as a flat fee? And what's happened virtually 100% of the time is the hourly fee would have been substantially greater. We're given a good deal, and frankly, Brian, I love that. And the reason I do, and I want to give we also always want to give great value for our services. That's what every service provider should be their goal. But there's a selfish reason as well, and that is as we get where we're partnering more with them, they use us more. And they feel more comfortable with us, and they want to use us more, and we become more partners with them. And so what has happened is those, and maybe this will kill it at some point. I hope it doesn't. I think it's because our services are worthwhile, but our monthly fees have gone up because of more usage. But to answer your specific question, we want to make you a good deal, and we do that by estimating the needs we think you will need, and then we base it kind of what our hourly rate would be, and then give you a discount because we feel like you are going to be calling all the time, and you'll become a regular client.
We're going to wrap it up here, but I want to give you the last word. If you have any advice or additional thoughts for our listeners, either on the market as you see it right now and taking those types of calibrated risks, or just advice on working with attorneys.
Because it's about real estate, I'd love to talk about attorneys, but that seems so self-serving. So let me say this: location, location, location. I'd also say stay in your lane. You know what you're used to. You know what you're comfortable with. Stay in your lane. And the third thing I would say is it's always good to develop a relationship with lenders. Whether you need the financing today or whether you never need financing, it's always good to develop great relationship with lenders because you don't know when that opportunity may come around. And and become an expert in your field is what I would say. So, Brian, thank you so much for having me. I hope that I've been helpful to your listeners. It's just an honor to be on one of a podcast that's in the top 15% of podcasts. And again, congratulations on what you've achieved.
Thank you, Johnny. And before you go, tell our listeners how they would get a hold of you or find out more about you.
The best way is Johnny Merritt, Johnny, Merritt, Merritt, JohnnyMerritt.com. They will find my website and pictures that have been brushed up as much as we can brush them up to make me look as young as they can make me look.
Well, thank you so much, Johnny. It's been a pleasure talking with you, getting your advice on the market and retail and office and just what you're seeing out there with your clients. I think you've provided a lot of great value for us today. You know, it's always good to get free advice from an attorney. and in your case, it comes with 30 years of experience. So thank you so much for having this conversation with us today.
Brian, thank you for having me.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.